So, hello everyone, welcome to another episode of our ALI Rio 2026 talk. I'm here today with David and Peggy Rockfeller, professor of history and of African and African American studies, affiliated with Romance languages and in the literature department of Harvard, Professor Sidney Schaloub. Thank you very much, Professor,
Thank you
for
for
your
having me.
time and your generosity.
Thank you for having me. Maybe I should say a couple of words about Machado de Assis himself. Machado de Assis was or is considered, or allegedly, the most important Brazilian novelist of all times. But he was also a great writer of short stories, chronicles, or newspaper columns. Um, and he was a founding member and the first president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters. He was a man of African descent. His father was a house painter. His mother, a poor Portuguese immigrant. Um, he grew up um, in a hill in downtown Rio. Um, this hill, actually, the whole area belonged to a wealthy seigneurial slaveholding family. Um, the the house um, was headed by a senator of the Brazilian Empire, and the family lived there as dependents.
Mhm.
So, but this may have given Machado de Assis some opportunities because the widow, when Machado was born, the senator had already died, but the widow um, actually was his godmother. In Baptist records, we see that this powerful widow was Machado de Assis's godmother, and her son-in-law was his godfather. And so Baptist records are really important type of source to understand network of relations that these people established. Machado's parents, the house painter and the immigrant Portuguese woman, in the same records um, on which you see Machado's baptismal record, you also see that his parents served as godparents to a baby girl born to an African woman, enslaved by the same
By
family.
the same family.
So there are whole networks and a hierarchy of dependency that Machado grew up with, and I think is very much present in much of what he writes.
Yeah,
So there's a hierarchy of dependency that he knew very well, and he understands
yeah.
he learned to navigate, I imagine,
Yeah.
since
So when talking about Brazilian history, we cannot avoid talking about slavery. So that's why when talking with to Professor Schaloub, he suggested a few short stories by Machado, and one of the stories we chose to talk to you about is Father Against Mother, and it's a powerful, not tale, but a powerful story. It's almost as powerful as a photograph that you see, like from a war, or one of those photographs that just stick with you. Like the images that at least I got from reading this short story, just, I can't get them off my mind. And so we would like to invite you to read the short story. Maybe you want to pause the video, go read it, and pick up again. You can do that, or you can listen to Professor Schaloub talk a little bit about it and then enjoy the reading also.
the first thing about Father Against Mother is that the story was published in 1906 in a volume in which Machado collected short stories he'd written the previous years, and it talks about it starts saying that the story is about things that happened half a century earlier, which throws us in the 1850s. In the 1850s, Rio was the largest slaveholding city in the whole Western Hemisphere, actually the largest that has ever existed. So there were 110,000 enslaved people living in Rio. The city had perhaps only 50,000 people. Of these 110,000 enslaved people, 60% were born in Africa. There was a black majority in the city, about 60% were black, because besides the enslaved people, there were freed people and people of African descent born free. So altogether, more than 60% were black people. So the city at this point was not only a city organized socially and economically by slavery, but also very Africanized. So when you start reading the story and he immediately situates us half a century earlier, we need to think about how the time in which the story is written helps us to understand what is happening because it refers to a much earlier time. Why is he doing this? Right? And the story itself begins with a very realist description of slave punishment. This is not really very typical of Machado to have such a raw, realist description of how enslaved people were punished and sometimes tortured, really. And the story is about a profession that was very common in the 1850s. What was the slave catcher? Right? So there are lots of details about this character called Cândido, who is married to a woman called Clara. They lived with an older woman called Monica, and he doesn't seem to be able to get a firm profession. He he tries different types of jobs and nothing works for him. And going after fugitive slaves was the thing that he liked to do the most, or he could do the best, especially because it didn't require too much discipline or steady work. He would read. How did that work? He would read advertisements of slaves who had run away in the daily papers. Then he would cut the announcements, study them. Then he would go out to the streets and be looking for. And then the slave catcher would capture the person and then take it to the slave owner to receive the reward. So this is what this guy did.
Yeah.
And
Professor, if I may, just because we're mentioning that there were people running away, Machado is brilliant when he describes that. How does he say? There were a lot of slaves at the time. There were half a century ago, slaves frequently ran away. There were lots of them, and not all of them liked being slaves. I mean, this is just something from time to time they would be beaten, and not all of them liked being beaten. Can you also tell a little bit about that way? I know we are making a stop to the story, but that way of Machado in describing slaves, right? Of course, no one wanted to be one.
When slavery ended in 1888, the following year, the monarchy fell and Brazil became a republic. And part of the reason why the monarchy fell was slaveholders' unhappiness with the fact that slavery ended. And they started supporting toppling the monarchy and bringing up a republican regime. And then the republican regime immediately starts a process of silencing the past of the country that had to do with slavery. So there was an attempt, for example, there is a famous story about the finance minister called Rui Barbosa, who decided to burn documents having to do with slavery, especially those having to do with paying taxes. Slavery was a property. You paid taxes on it. You had to register the property. The main idea the finance minister had was to prevent slaveholders who lost their property in 1888 due to abolition. Abolition, is a law with two articles declaring slavery ended, and that's it. There was no compensation to slaveholders for the property they lost. Neither was there any compensation to enslaved people who worked for free for so many years. But the class that was organized to demand compensation was the slaveholders. And the finance minister wanted to destroy these property tax documents, property registration documents, to make it harder for former slaveholders to demand compensation. However, the way this thing was publicized and advertised was that they were erasing this terrible past and looking into the future. So forget about slavery. So the whole society actually organized in the first decades, not the whole society, but authorities, elite members, the political elite, there was some kind of pact about silencing regarding slavery and that past that was shameful for the country, so on and so forth. And so, what Machado is doing with that story is saying, look, there is no way this thing can be forgotten. Look at what it was like. Right? So, the legacy that this institution left is going to be with us, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And so, this is a motivation, I think, for this story and for the very realistic tone
Yeah.
that it has, especially in the first paragraphs, but in the whole story.
Yes.
And I think so. It's a story in many ways to shock, and that's why these sentences are, short. And also, of course, there is a kind of sour tone
Yes.
in the sense that you can't forget this, and then the sentences are short and very
It
shocking.
punches. Yes, it's a punch in the stomach.
A punch in the
It's
stomach. That's a good description of what
Yes,
this story
it
is
is.
like.
It is.
It's a tragic story because
is.
the slave catcher, because
So Clara
they
gets
need money.
pregnant. Yes,
Clara gets pregnant, so they need money, and Aunt Monica is trying to convince the couple that they can't afford to have a child, and they should give it to the foundling will, which is a house that would receive children abandoned by their parents and take care of them.
Yeah.
So you should give away the child to someone, to adoption.
Yeah.
And finally, although they resist, especially the father, Cândido resists doing this a lot, but in the end, he recognizes that there is no way they can't pay the rent. They are living by favor in someone else's house. So what happens is that he accepts this suggestion of giving away the child, and he leaves to do that. But at the same time, he's still hoping that perhaps he will catch a slave and get a reward and perhaps change the situation around. And as he's going to give the child away in that specific house where he had to do this, he thought he had identified an enslaved woman who had run away, whose description he had with him, and he was looking for her for a while. Then he leaves the child. He goes to a pharmacy, leaves the child there, goes after that woman, catches her, takes her to her master. The reward was 100,000 reais, which was good money at the time. You could go buy a couple months with that money. In the 50s, probably more than a couple months. And then, but the woman is pregnant. She resists. She fights back a lot, asks for mercy, but he's still
he's irreducible. He's just he.
That's why it's father against mother.
Yes.
He's thinking that this reward would be a way of keeping his son. And then he gets to the owner's house, gives her to the owner, or in the process of doing this, she falls on the ground and she has an abortion. So it's a tragic story. Then he gets the child and walks back home with the reward and the child. And then Aunt Monica was insisting for the child to be given away because he gets home with the significant reward, accepts in the situation. Then the story is over with this terrible reflection that is the last sentence of the story. He says, "Not all children make it," his heart told him. So it's really an awful ending.